Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Dave Patten, and I'm head of new media at the Science Museum in London. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our museum and then give you a sort of sample of the way that we deal with communicating science through a range of different experiences and media in the museum, and leave you with, hopefully, with a couple of fun things at the end. So, we're a really big museum. We get about 2.1 million people a year through the door, and of those, 360,000 come in booked school groups. But we get quite a lot of independent adults as well. About 33% of the audience are independent adults, and that's an area that we're growing. We have about 23,500 square metres of exhibition space, and about 4,000 square metres of commercial space. And the commercial space is an IMAX cinema, some shops, and some restaurants and cafes, and some studio spaces and some simulators. And we have museum-wide free public Wi-Fi, and that was a decision we made to implement that about 2 years ago, because a whole load of stuff that we want to do over the next 5 years is absolutely premised on people being able to get online all over the museum really easily and at no cost. So who am I? I'm a technologist, and I'm quite geeky. I've been at the Science Museum for a long time. I've been at the Science Museum for about 28 years. So when I first started at the museum, new media was 2 slide projectors and a tape player that played audio to sync the projectors together. And I do geeky things, so I carry loads of technology around with me all the time, and I photograph the technology that I carry around with me all the time. Okay, is that better? And I started doing this because I was hopeful that I could carry less around over time, and I thought that when I started taking these pictures, and this is probably from 2000 and maybe 2009, 2010, I was hoping I'd have one magic device quite soon that I could do everything on and not have to carry all of this stuff around. This is a picture from middle of last year, I guess. I'm still carrying lots of technology around. It's got different. And what I realized is actually I'm less concerned about carrying all that technology around. What I want it to do is everything to talk to each other seamlessly. So I want to be able to use a great camera. I want a small laptop. I want it to talk to my phone. I'd like to be able to have one mobile phone, not 2. And I often carry bits of technology around that I'm working on. So I was obviously doing an Arduino project at that point. And it was probably at the end of Web Labs, which I'll talk about briefly, and that's why there's this card there. And I always carry guitar plectrums around because I live in hope that I might find a guitar that I can really annoy people by playing. So the museum grew out of the Great Exhibition in London of 1851, and we acquired, some of the first objects the museum acquired were things that were given to the Great Exhibition. And it was originally housed at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and this is a picture when the museum's collections were at the V&A, where it was known as the non-arts collection at the V&A. So everything that wasn't art was the science stuff that we took away. We were one of the first museums to build hands-on interactive spaces. So this is a photograph of the museum's children's gallery, which opened in the early 1920s, where we took an approach that we would let children experiment and do science and try and find things out for themselves rather than just tell them. So this is an exhibit about forces, and it's a whole load of pulleys, different pulley ratios, and you can lift weights up and see that if you change the ratios, it gets much easier to lift weights up. And we've continued this practice. We have very traditional exhibitions in the museum that are full of objects. So we have a massive collection of objects, everything from Stephenson's rocket, one of the original Bessemer converters, a very early Cray 1 supercomputer. So a really diverse range of objects. And we do a lot of exhibitions as well on contemporary science where we have either no objects or the objects are not very interesting. So this was an exhibition on digital technologies that opened in 2000 and was talking about the emerging digital technologies and how they were going to impact our lives over the next 5 to 10 years. Another example is our antenna gallery, and this is an exhibition space where we deliver contemporary science news to the public and we engage the public in discussion around contemporary science news issues. through to mixed media exhibitions. So this is an exhibition called Who Am I, which is based around our biomedical collections. So we use the collections to tell stories, and we surround those with lots of interactive pieces to explain some of the underlying science behind the stories we're telling, or to allow the public to take part in that discourse around the scientific practice. But everything we do for people, we do for visitors, and they're different. And we want to do things in a way that doesn't make our visitors feel stupid, which means we need to recognize they're different, and we do different things for different visitors. So, one of the approaches we have to help us do that is when we first start thinking about a new exhibition, we write what we call a messaging document. So we lay out some key messages for an exhibition. So an exhibition space may have one key message that's going to communicate. So if it was an exhibition about climate science, it might be that scientists measure climate to see if it's changing over time. And we then break that down. Underneath that, there's a set of messages which are the key themes of the exhibition, and there might be 5 or 10 of those. And then beneath that, there's another layer of messaging which further breaks that down. And we end up with individual messages for every component on the exhibition. So every object has a message that it's trying to deliver. Every exhibit has a message. And we can measure, when we're building things and testing things, which is another big part of our practice, we can measure whether we're effectively communicating those messages. And those messages are quite often educational outcomes that we want people to walk away with. So a lot of my practice is around building exhibits and building prototypes. So these are some examples of a very early part of WebLab. We were building robots that took your picture, processed your image, and drew your image in sand while it real-time streamed the video out to you and images, saved images for you. We built some very early prototypes. We were working with a company in Rhode Island in North America, and we managed to convince the Boston Science Museum to let us take over an exhibition space for 2 weeks to test some of these early prototypes with real people to find out whether they took away the messages we were hoping that they take away from that experience. And this is what the sketchbots ended up like in the exhibition space. So there's a series of robots, beautifully cased, but actually they work and they communicate the messages because we'd done the early prototyping. So we worked out what you needed to tell people to use them, how much information, how you structured the content on screen to help guide people through what they were going to do, and how you help them come back and get that takeaway experience. We have lots and lots of objects, and that's always a challenge, and it's a challenge that we kind of put to one side between 2000 and 2012-13, where we concentrated on building a series of contemporary science exhibitions. We're now in the middle of building quite a lot of new, very object-rich collections, and we're looking at how we communicate the science and interpret the objects and bring those objects to life. And you can see, along with lots of other museums, if you look very carefully just at the bottom, you can see small text labels, and by each object there's a number, and there's a small piece of text, and the piece of text will probably say something like, a television from 1952, made of Bakelite, inventory number, blah, 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 and it doesn't actually tell you anything at all. So if you came across this, you might wonder why we collected that and what's important. And the important things around the objects are the stories that are in the object. So this is really significant. This was the last Brother typewriter made in Europe. They're not making this, and this is the last typewriter made in Europe. So this is really, really a really important change. It's a technology that's disappeared. We captured the last one. So we want to find ways of bringing the stories and communicating the stories about the objects, and often what the underlying science or technology is that makes those objects work. And like lots of museums, we have an array of ways of doing that. So we have dioramas where we set scenes and use that as a sort of visual illustration of a point in time, or it might be a mechanism that's working. We have extended graphics panels. So this is in our main power hall. And you can see there's a run of graphic labels along the front of that describing the large power engine that you see behind. One of the interesting things we tried with this exhibition was to embed some digital labels within the space, because what we wanted to do was explain how those engines worked. And to do that, you need to show basically animations and moving graphics. And that's the screen you can see on the right-hand side. And we run a series of animations where you can explore the animations, you can zoom in and out, you can play forward and back with the animations to find out what the key components of the engines are and how they work. There's a massive challenge for us, which was kind of not unexpected when we did this. People don't read the labels very much, which is why we're looking to do other things. When we put screens in front of objects, what we find is people look at the screens and don't look at the real objects that are behind. So even though the real object is just behind that screen, about 90% of people only look at what happens on the screen. And for us, that's really, really disappointing. We want people to come to our museum and we want them to see the real thing. We want to enjoy the objects. And I'll show you some things in a bit later that we're trying to do to get over that. But we're like Neil, who was at the conference with Google Glass, are very excited by these wearable technologies, and they may provide opportunities. And some of the work we're doing at the moment is preparing us for when those wearable technologies become more commonplace. We allow people to do science. So this is a hands-on space in the museum, where there are a whole load of experiments that you can do around physical phenomena. So the big grey tube is an echo tube. You can shout up, you can hear the delay because of the length of the tube, and you can put shutters in at various lengths to change that delay time. It's a really, really great way of getting people to explore themselves, the underlying science and the scientific principles, but it is quite separate from the museum. One of the projects I'm working on at the moment is the next version of this, and we're looking at how we actually join the experiences you have in here into the experiences, or help you understand the things that you're seeing in the museum. So when you're the exhibit in the center with the young man with the red stripe on his sleeve is about building cantilever bridges. So you get to experiment with a set of blocks, looking at how you cantilever and how far you can go and what you need to do to make successful bridges. What we'd like people to do is when they walk into the rest of the museum and see models and dioramas of bridges, to understand that's the principle by which they work. And we've not managed to link those two things together yet in the minds of the visitors. When we're dealing with contemporary science, we want people to take part in the debate around whether they agree with the direction that science is going, what their concerns are. So this photograph is from an exhibition called In Future, where we built a series of games that look at potential scientific futures. And this was built in 1999. It's a series of games that do things like look at whether you'd like to be able to electronically tag your children and know where they are. Would you be happy with self-driving cars? What do you think about men being able to be pregnant? Would you like to be a space tourist? And you play a series of really short games with other people, and then you get to make decisions on whether you think that would be a good technology or not, and leave us comments. We set this, when we built this in 1999, we set the future at 2015, so we're almost there. So we're taking this out this year. It's kind of scary. Some of the things have almost come to pass, and some things are still a long way away. But it's a great way, this is a great format for engaging the public with new concepts. And one of the things that this has been really successful at is people talk to each other around the exhibit. So it promotes conversation with people that don't know each other. So they'll play the game, and the games are quite quirky, and then they'll talk about what they've done with other people and talk about how they feel about that. And that's a great way for embedding the learning that people have around these experiences. So on to looking at how we try and, we're trying different kinds of things. So one of the things is we want people to experience the science and the materiality. So this is an exhibit from a plastics exhibition that allows you to explore the properties of plastics. So this actually works with real plastic samples. So down the side there are plastic samples, and you'll pose questions. Can you find a plastic that would be good for making something, and you get to handle those samples so you can see whether they're pliable, whether they're hard, whether they're going to damage easily. And the samples all have radio frequency identifiers built into them, so you can swipe them across the screen to find out whether you were right or not and find out about the properties of that material. And that's a great thing to do. So it actually uses the underlying material as the interface for the public to engage with that content. So you actually handle real plastics. It's quite hard to find subjects where you can do that with effectively, but certainly for this was a great way of doing this, and it's a very, very popular exhibit with people. We're looking at augmenting real physical objects, so projecting layers of content across real physical objects. So a lot of objects, it's not obvious what's inside or how they work, and we're looking at whether you can use projection to highlight the internals of an object or make the invisible visible. So there's some really interesting work being done at the moment in the Franklin Institute who have a National Science Foundation grant to explore this for physical principles. So they're looking at how do you make things like electricity visible in electrical circuits, and they're doing that by projecting current flows through circuits that you can manipulate, and the projection system recognizes the manipulation and projects the outcome. So you can begin to see things that are hard to visualize, particularly for children, in a very, very interactive way. And we're really interested with this, with big objects. So this is a massive radio transmitter, and we wanted the public to be able to explore the individual components of that and how they work, and you know, where the power supply is in the transmitter, how the radio waves are actually transmitted. So this is an attempt to start to visualize the internals of that, but it's projected on a real object. So you can turn all this projection off, and there's the object. It's a challenge for museums because certainly there are conservation challenges about throwing large levels of light onto some objects in our collection. We're doing work around making interactive models. So this is a radio receiver, and we're using a real radio receiver as the interface to interactive content. So you use the device to understand the interpretation. So you can tune in to different stations, which will give you different elements of content about the physical device. To start to get around this problem that people, if you put screens in front of things, people don't necessarily look at the real objects, we're doing work with a technology called transparent touchscreens. So we're building showcases from touchscreens that you can see through. So actually you look through a screen at the real object. You can make the screen almost completely transparent so that you can see the object, and you can overlay text and images and animations in front of the object so it's in your field of view. And this is like a fixed version of Google Glass, so it doesn't rely on the visitor having any technology, but it kind of gives you the same experience. It's about augmenting and putting that content directly in your field of vision so that you can't help but see the object. And it offers up some really interesting opportunities when you're teaching people about objects, because you can basically shutter the screen down so you can direct attention just onto particular elements of the object when you're talking about it. So in the previous slide, you might want to just focus on the LCD display on that calculator. So you could hide everything but the LCD display on that calculator and run the video or the content around it, and then zoom out and see the whole object again. So it's a great way of talking about breaking an object down into its component parts and explaining those to people. We also use games a lot in the museum as a way of teaching people about underlying science. So this is a game that was developed for the hands-on gallery Launchpad that I showed you the photographs of earlier. And we wanted something that did exactly the same thing as the exhibition did, so allowed you to experiment with physical principles. And we didn't want to duplicate things that were in the exhibition, so what we built was a computer-based physics engine and set a series of challenges. So they're really, really simple challenges. You have to get the ball from one place to another on screen. And there are an amazing variety of devices that you can drag onto screen to help you do that. And we built this online, and we built a small app with this on, and we built about 50 levels of this game, but we put a level editor in so that people can make their own levels. And people have generated hundreds of thousands of different challenges in this game. So it's a really simple game, it's really, really playful. It does help you understand the underlying physics. So each of these blocks has a property, so the little flames heat something up, the magnets attract things, the fans blow things. So these are directly related to the physical principles in the gallery. And you can build really quite complex challenges in this and share the results with other people. And we built games. This is a game for our biomedical exhibition. So this is to teach young children about genetics and inheritance. And it's a game called Thingdom. So you get to make a creature and you get to breed it with other creatures to try and bring out genetic traits. So your challenge might be to breed a creature that has spots and not stripes and spiky hair and not soft hair. So you go through it. It's kind of like a Tamagotchi with a real playful element to it. And again, it's a great way of teaching young children about genetics and inheritance in a very playful fashion where they don't really realize they're being taught things. We also do a lot of work with artists to communicate science. And we've worked with artists probably for about 25 years. It's kind of quite a big part of our practice, so we always commission new artwork as part of an exhibition. And we work with artists because they have often a different way of understanding the underlying science and a different way of communicating with the public. And often it's the public find the communication from an artist easier to take than a communication from a scientist. Because I think the artists, because they understand less about the underlying science, find it easier to talk at a level that the general public understand. So just a couple of examples of artworks, and we have everything from sculpture to paintings to interactive pieces. This is an interactive piece by an American artist called Scott Snibbe, where it's a full body experience and your body becomes a lens to focus and manipulate light. So your body might be a mirror, in this case it's a prism, and you can basically play in front of this screen. You know what your body is being, so you know whether you're being a prism or a lens. And we video capture all of this in the system, and we'll email you out a short video, and this is your kind of postcard, electronic postcard of your experience of the exhibition. This is a very different way of working with an artist. So we opened an exhibition on climate change in 2011. And it's such an important topic for our museum that we wanted to make interventions in every space in the museum because we were worried that people wouldn't visit an exhibition on climate change, and we wanted them to encounter climate change in the museum. This was the work of a graduate student at the Royal College of Art who wanted to look at consumerism and use of resource, which is one of the sort of underlying things around the issues of climate science. So he took a really, really simple thing. He bought a very, very cheap toaster from a supermarket. So it's a £5 electric toaster. And then he spent a year to make his own from first principles. So he drilled for the oil, he made the plastic, he made his own batteries, he taught himself all the techniques for doing that. That's his toaster here. It worked, but it incinerated itself almost straight away. These are the batteries that made it work. This is the smelter for making the wires. And he documented the whole process. And it's really a piece that says, we take for granted. We have these things that cost almost no money. When they break, we throw them away. These are incredibly difficult things to make. They take a lot of skill. They take a lot of raw resource to do. It's a really, really interesting piece, and it's a great documentary and publication that goes along with that. And he filmed everything. So he phoned BP up and said, this is what I'm doing, I need some oil, can I come out to a drilling well and drill for some oil? And he, talking to, in the end, it was the CEO of BP, and he documented all of that. It's just a really, really nice piece, and has a really different quality to lots of things in the museum. We do big shows for children. So we have a comedy group in the museum called Punk Science, and they deliver quite hard scientific content through a comedy show. And they can be quite interactive comedy shows. So this is quite a big one in a big lecture theatre. They do quite small scale things in rooms this size. And they do those both in the museum, but they go around the country doing those things as well. And we do more intimate events where people get really different kinds of encounters with science. So this was from some programs that we ran in the Dana Centre a couple of years ago, and we live linked into an operating theatre in North America, and this is basically talking to surgeons while they're operating on somebody's heart. So you're in a situation that most people are never conscious in unless you're in a medical profession. You get to see surgery and you get to talk to the surgeons while they're carrying out the surgery. So this is seeing science firsthand and being able to talk to the people that are practicing that. It's an amazing experience. And we've done the same kind of thing online. So we did, when big museums were doing it, we did some work in Second Life looking at how you run these kinds of events in Second Life. And we deal with different things in different ways for different audiences. So we run a late event once a month, which is primarily for teenagers and early 20s, where we close the museum, we reopen it in the evening. We have a theme for each of those events, and we have licensed bars, we have silent disco, but we have scientists to talk to, we have workshops. So this is an image from Silent Disco and a flight gallery. This is an image from one of the late events we ran last year, which is around consciousness, and we themed the whole thing around zombies, which is quite an interesting way to look at what it means to be conscious. And we had about 12,000 people turn up at the museum on a Wednesday night dressed as zombies. And we were doing trials of consciousness, they were looking at issues on divided societies, really kind of fun, but again, some really hard science, and we had psychologists and we had people from the medical profession there to talk about their views on all of these things and discuss with the public. Just a few more things to show you. So one of the things we've done really recently is look at how we get our content onto apps. So this is an app we released at the end of last year. It takes 100 key objects from our collection. This is an out-of-museum experience. So this is an experience to have at home, not in the museum. We take 100 objects from our collection and we take you on journeys that link those objects together. So there might be a journey about play, it might be a journey about danger, it might be a journey about scientific discovery. So there are a series of journeys that take you from the Enlightenment through to the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. I'm not sure. So these are just some examples. So it's full of rich media, there's fantastic photography. There are little interactive pieces, so there's Hooke's microscope, and you actually get to use Hooke's microscope and see real things that he would have seen underneath the microscope. That's a bowl in our collection from Hiroshima. So it's got the damage from the atom bomb. The brain underneath it is half of Charles Babbage's brain. And that's the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. I'm just going to skip through these because this is actually built up in an animation that I don't want to go into. So this is the home screen. You can see all of those lines represent different journeys that you can take through the collection. And one of the things we wanted to do with this was make people aware that all of those objects, when you physically put them in a museum, they can really only be part of one story because of the physicality of a space. When you represent these things electronically, they can be at the junction of lots of stories, and you can slip from one storyline to another. And this is a way of exploring how you might do that. So you can see some of those objects have multiple lines going through, and at that point you can move from one story into another or back. And it's basically a free app, or the basic version is free, and there's a small price to upgrade to the full version. I'm just going to finish just with a couple of things that we've got coming up that are kind of interesting in terms of future practice. This is our shipping gallery, which was built in 1961, which we took out this year. It's an enormous exhibition that looked at the history of ships, primarily in the UK. Was obviously very out of date by the time we took it out, but still reasonably popular with people. And we've taken it out to build a large communication gallery. We worked with some people at University College to 3D scan the entire exhibition, and this is just a short video render of the 3D scan of the exhibition. So this is a digital representation of the exhibition. We're now working with various companies to look at how we can deliver this content in real time to people's devices, and there is hundreds of terabytes of data in this data set. It's enormous. And there are real challenges in delivering this in real time and processing this in real time. But we think this has huge opportunities, both to archive our exhibitions, but also to take our exhibitions online and allow us to communicate with a wider public than those that can come to the museum. This is just another shot of Web Lab. So this is a project we did with Google, looking at what it means to have a museum that's open 24 hours a day and accessible from anywhere in the world. So this was a series of real physical installations in the museum. There's just a short video showing some of this, that you could interact with through a browser from anywhere in the world. And when you were doing that, you were actually making physical things in the museum work, and there were real people in the exhibition space, so you were co-inhabiting a space in the museum. And we were really interested in the technology involved in doing that, how the public would respond to being in that kind of shared physical virtual space, and actually what it means to run an exhibition 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How do you engineer something that's that robust, that doesn't need constant attention? So these are the sketchbots drawing, and there was a kind of real magical moment the first day we opened, and then we closed it at 6 o'clock to the public, and everything switches over to being completely online, and you're in a space where on that first evening, we were watching these, and there were people logged on from Russia, from Hungary, from Australia, from America, and there are no people. But there are people at the end of wires that are still interacting with your content. And it made me really think of this, and this is kind of where we're going, and I think for our children, they're probably there already. When we look back on where we are at the moment, we'll find it really, really hard to believe how we ever separated out the digital from the real world. And I think one of the things that holds us back most, certainly in my museum, is when we talk about digital as a separate thing. It's not. It's part of the stuff we all do. It's one of our interpretive tools. And my aim is to make this disappear. It needs to be seamless. I don't want to have a museum that's filled with screens. I want to find other ways of delivering that content to people. And I think, in maybe not 5 years, maybe 10 years, we will look back, and it will be really hard to understand why we ever thought this was a different thing. And I'm going to leave you just with a fun thing. So this is the Climate Science Gallery, and as I said, we made interventions across the space. And one of the calls was for artists to do something interesting, and we had a proposal from a group of artists in Denmark who said, wouldn't it be fun to dress your visitors up as cockroaches and explore the museum through the eyes of a cockroach? And the premise being, really strong, cockroaches were around before people, and when we've completely destroyed the planet through our misuse of everything, the cockroaches will still be here. So you get to dress up in a cockroach uniform and scuttle around the museum and look at the collection through the eyes of cockroaches and look at all of the mad things human beings have done, all the cars they've made, the raw resources we've dug up, the just really odd things. And this is just a short video to leave you with, and it really is short. It's about a minute long, of the cockroaches doing their stuff. Yeah, the audio's... So we had funding to run that for a year, and it's been so successful we've run it every year since then. It's just a really different way of engaging with science. It's really fun. We were amazed we managed to get it through our senior management team because we loved the idea but thought it was completely mad, and we thought they'd think we were mad when we presented. We had a director who was really up for doing something different, and we got it out on the floor. Visitors absolutely love it because it's such a different way of encountering the museum. And it's great for all the visitors because it's a piece of theatre for everybody else, because you really do wonder why these people are kind of running around in these little costumes. So, I'll leave you with that. Thank you.